Hello everyone, welcome back to our CIE Podcast Series on the hallmarks and graduate attributes of our curriculum framework at the University of Liverpool. Today we are joined by a group of academics from different disciplines to talk about digital fluency. I'll start with some introductions. So I'm Tunde Varga-Atkins. I'm a senior educational developer in the Centre for Innovation in Education at Liverpool University.
I'm Rob Treharne. I'm a lecturer in Technology Enhanced Learning in the Faculty of Health and Life Sciences at the University of Liverpool.
I'm Jon Hogg. I work in the Department of History and I'm also Associate Dean for Education in the School of Histories, Languages and Cultures.
And I'm Kerry Traynor. I'm a lecturer in Communication and Media in School of the Arts, also at University of Liverpool.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I think we have come here today because we wanted to really talk about digital fluency, which is a graduate attribute at the university, and it's something that all our academics have to think about when they design curriculum, and it's what we want our graduates to be digitally fluent when they graduate. And I think because it's such an abstract concept, and it ideally means different things for different subjects, which we have a lovely representation here today. So really, this podcast is aiming at your colleagues and seeing how we might, pick this idea up in our respective programs. And so that's really why we're here to talk a little bit about that. And I know we've given you a task, so maybe we could start with that.
Okay, yeah.
So we've all asked you to bring an object or think of an object or an artifact or something, whether it's virtual, physical, whatever it is, that you would associate with digital fluency.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so can we go around and see what you have come up with? And I think it's you can talk about either the process of thinking about or why you have chosen that object or artifact. And really, yeah, anyway, let's just see what you've got. And I think, again, because it's for radio, we probably need to describe the object. So I don't know whether it would work better if someone else described your object.
Okay.
Of what it looks like. And then you would then talk about it.
Okay. So, would someone like to describe what I'm holding?
Is it an envelope?
It's I'm very observant. It's a plain 30p white envelope. I've just bought it from the stationer. Would anyone like to guess what's in it?
Looks a bit
Is
rectangular.
it a phone?
It is a phone. It's my phone, in fact. So it might not have been a good idea to start with me because I'm going to be quite negative about technology in the next 30 seconds, I imagine. Well, not negative.
No, please do.
Just the acknowledgement that we're in this sort of era where technology is absolutely fundamental to a university and it's used ubiquitously, and we're expecting all our students to engage with technology at some point and staff, and this really is an acknowledgement that being digitally fluent is one thing, and you can do that in a very, very positive way. But there are, a certain number of negative or downsides to that technology as well. And for me personally, that is the level of distraction that I encounter from my phone. All this communication is great, but if it stops me from doing, work or writing or reading, then that's a problem. And so, I this is a bit conceited to say I don't do this anymore, but recently I got to the point where I was looking at my phone, it must have been hundreds of times a day. If I'd counted them, it would have been awful. I even put software on there to track how many times I was opening my phone, but that became a bit meta because then I got addicted to looking at the app to figuring out how many times I looked at it. So the best solution I came up with at the end of the day is taking my phone and putting it in an envelope and sealing the envelope. And the sealing is important.
I was just going to point
that out.
That
seal
it is sealed.
Because there's something associated with actually unpeeling this and irrevocably using, not being able to use that envelope again. That stops you from actually doing it. It doesn't work with envelopes that have a transparent window on. I've checked, I've tried that, and I'm able to check my phone through the window, so it's got to be a completely opaque envelope. And by doing that, even though I'm using technology on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, minute by minute, my productivity went up because I wasn't distracted by my phone. So that was my object.
Can I just say that I actually left my mobile phone at home today, and
really?
it feels great, and I have suffered from the same thing.
Yes, so I've only ever done that by accident, and even though it does feel great, and I always feel better, I still take it with me every day, deliberately.
It's interesting you say this, because my object is a graphic novel by Raymond Briggs called When the Wind Blows, because my research and teaching is on kind of nuclear history. And one point I was going to make is that I think digital, the way we think about it in our subject in history, is very much supplementing a lot of other things we might get to talk about. And very often with our students, it's talking about the limitations of digital. So, for example, it's not to go to a digital resource and think, I found these 5 or 10 things, so now that's my research project, I can go away. Because there's also an awful lot that's not digitised yet. So I think, I was interested in thinking about I think what you're talking about in terms of the potential for distraction, I think for our own students very much, but also the sort of limitations of digital, or seeing digital as a kind of supplement or a complement to what we might call more traditional approaches to a discipline. So it's interesting, because I did think about that sort of bringing in an object. I think, well, that's not digitised. And also students get really excited, looking at these books from the 1980s and so on. So there's something there as well about maybe engagement as well.
Can I just ask why you chose the Raymond Briggs, so the graphic novel? What is it that you made choose that one?
I suppose in a sense it was that students, if we think about digitally aware students, I think they need that kind of awareness, or we need to encourage a sort of awareness about the brilliant potential that digital offers us, but also if we think about the best digitally aware graduates, it might also be about stepping back a little bit and maybe taking that time out and saying, I need to revise today, I'm not going to look at my phone, and this kind of thing. So it's that sort of balance. So for me, digital fluency is also about kind of almost a philosophical stance, almost, about what it means in our lives.
So this is Raymond Briggs, as in the snowman, and Father Christmas. Okay.
So he wrote a very, it's quite a downbeat graphic novel about what happens in the event of nuclear war.
Right. Okay.
To an old couple who choose to follow civil defence advice.
Okay. Comedy then, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I haven't read
that one.
I
need to go and see
that. I remember it being very scary as a child, and actually it's kind of the culmination of all the fears that people have about technology and science and advance, that maybe it all goes wrong and look where we end up.
And of course we're less afraid of sort of nuclear holocaust now, more afraid of artificial intelligence and things like this, aren't we? So that's sort of the new technology, isn't it? Yeah.
But the same fear, probably, is it? Or
well, just human destruction, right?
It's the humans they need it.
How much control do we have?
Yeah.
But I think there's always been moral panics about every kind of new technology. We had it about radio. We had Orson Welles' kind of radio broadcast that sent people supposedly screaming into the streets because they feared an alien invasion was taking place. We had fears about television. We've had fears about the internet. It kind of comes and goes. We've all managed to adapt to each new form of technology that comes around. And sometimes I just think the whole of humanity is kind of like a kid with a new toy at the moment. We are absolutely overindulging. It's causing mental health problems in our students and in ourselves, perhaps.
Especially children as well. I think that's a big area, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is, it has got the kind of ubiquity of new media now, when it's not just on a screen in our living room or on our desk, but it's on our phones, wearable tech, it's all across the city. There is a real danger, but as well we have to keep that in perspective, I think, and think about all the positive things, and the access to information and the sort of amazing things that technology can do. So having said
your
that,
object?
wow,
Yes,
what a great
sure.
introduction to my object. I didn't plan it like that. So the object that I've bought is rather predictably a tablet, but what it is showing at the moment is a YouTube channel that my students have created, which is called Media Pool, which is based on our kind of departmental blog. It's produced by my third year students, and it kind of encapsulates just, I think, for some of them, it's a place where they've been able to explore video as a communicative tool. They've been able to think about the kind of characteristics of different kinds of media assets and what makes some media more contagious, more viral, more kind of appealing and engaging to viewers than others. And where they can kind of express their own creativity as well, which I think, is a great part of the course that brings them a lot of satisfaction. They also get to go out and work with clients on these. They produce sort of, I don't want to call them marketing videos, because sometimes they're not marketing. Sometimes they've got a more sort of activist type theme. So they've been going out working with charities, helping them raise awareness of their causes, secure more volunteers, generate donations and things, as well as, bringing new visitors into the city perhaps, or making use of new apps, whatever it might be. They set themselves a challenge, they work with clients and they work with team members to create something really that is, greater than something they could do on their own. So for me, that kind of represents, a really great project that they're able to use these kind of technologies.
And it's lovely because from your 3 objects, it's almost like the way you've described it, it's almost like a relational aspect to technology. So your envelope was very much about, in that case, thinking about when it is useful, when it's not, and it's been a way. And then, Jon, you were talking about criticality and, being aware of technology. And I think, Kerry, your example was lovely in like technology as the space we can inhibit and work with and connect with one another. So there's really good examples on that. I've been thinking, because all along I also did I did my own homework. So what I end up bringing is can you describe what you see?
You've got a salt and a pepper cellar. Or grinders, they're grinders, aren't they? Yeah.
What do you think why I might have chosen? Let's take salt first.
Is it something that you're seasoning, so you're enhancing your education by adding the salt and pepper or something like that?
So that's, I think there's a lot of that. This is where metaphors can be good for various reasons and probably have some limitations as well. I was trying to find something where, to me also, digital is the interesting bit about digital fluency, that it's primarily about your subjects, about history, about life sciences, about communication and media, but the digital always almost exists somewhere within it, underpinning it, or somewhere. So, but then I guess it comes back to the ubiquity, or that you notice it if it's not there, or perhaps if there's too much, you notice that as well. So it's that having that. So having that aspect of it.
So basically you're saying technology is something that you wouldn't eat on its own.
Yeah.
Salt and pepper.
Yeah,
right?
it's so you are in charge of making a meal and deciding what that meal is going to be like. If it's whether it's history, music, that's the main thing, that's the main focus, but the salt can make it, I don't know. I don't know whether that resonates or.
I think that's a great analogy. Yeah, I think so. Oh no, I'd finished.
I was just going to say, because I think the example of the YouTube channel there, I can see how digital is part of this process that I think you described, sort of from the beginning to the end. So in terms of history, I suppose I was thinking more about the research process and almost the temptation to think, if you find certain things now on a digital in a digital format, it's very accessible, it's brilliant, you don't have to travel so much. We've seen, I think, with students sometimes where they think, that's the end of that project, I've done that. But actually, as researchers, we might have to triangulate a little bit more, think very critically about what we're finding. Maybe we do have to travel to an archive to double check or to build on what we've found. So in a way, it opens up a lot of possibilities, and it's about, I suppose, the research process in that way. So finding how digital fits and what new questions we have to ask before then we get to writing and the product, as it were. So
yeah, that's a nice insight into what you're trying to get students to do in history, for in this case. Yeah. I mean, just to add the other bit, the pepper, because I was trying to think, well, partly, almost the spice of life. So in some instance, we say that we want to use technology because it can be more efficient, or, but I haven't met an academic when they have said, I use Vital and how it's doing. And for anyone not from Liverpool, Vital is our VLE. But to me, that's not necessarily the digital fluency, because it's not about your discipline. As in, when I say Vital, as in probably like a repository of content, or not the interactive features, but when someone uses it as a repository, or perhaps, submit, the students have to submit online. That's not necessarily about your discipline. So to me, the spice, whether it's pepper or whatever lovely spice, so that enables you to do things that you might not be otherwise be able to do. So it comes back, John, to what you said about perhaps it enables you to do something, a new research question that you haven't done, or have you got examples perhaps for that in your areas where you were able to do something?
I think there's certainly a lot of opportunities in terms of digitizing historical archives that you were talking about before. I'm very interested in looking at historical press coverage. There have been digitisations. There are archives in the National Library and the British Library, but I'm not able to access those on a particularly easy basis. So to have all of those digitised, going back hundreds of years, local national newspapers, is an absolutely amazing sort of treasure trove through which to explore our world and the way that media has represented us through the ages. So yeah, absolutely.
And for our students, it offers that bridge from the archive to the classroom as well. So I think people like Zoe Alker from the Sociology Department at Liverpool and Andrew Davis, who works in history as well, have been working, for quite a number of years on this as well. And it's very much that bridge. And again, it's it's the opportunities, but also the kind of excitement that brings to students. These digital archives, they open up so many possibilities, not in terms of just sort of quantitative analysis and so on, but thinking through what we can do if we understand more about discourse from a particular era, and what new research questions does that allow us to explore.
Just recently we had Alex Buchanan on our event then we just had the Notre Dame news of the fire, and then her research area in archival studies is digitizing churches and buildings. So they worked with someone in the US who has actually digitized Notre Dame. So had it burned down, he would have been able to, or they would have been able to provide that amazing resource. So I just think that's again almost like you can build a new world. That is. So, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think, okay, so to carry on from that, so I think that's brilliant, but I always worry that, that using it that way can also be sometimes to a detriment as well. If you, if that would, having that might, for some reason, someone might forget to insure Notre Dame the next time, thinking, it'll be okay because if it burns down, we've got all this on record. You still can't go to the place, you can't smell what it's like or touch the stone and you can't listen to what it's like inside. I think that's sort of coming back to my sort of uneasy relationship with technology is it's never a complete substitute for the real thing.
So let's talk about what that relationship and when it's important. So in terms of in whatever you're teaching or whatever you're trying to develop your graduates, because we did talk a little bit about what's important in history, communication and media. So if you think about, perhaps if you just say a little bit about your field, you know, what if you were describing history or life sciences or whatever you want the students to become, what would that thing, but forget the digital for a moment and just think what's important. And perhaps the way to do it is to think, to do it, we did display in one of the workshops, is that as you're describing, let's say, a historian and what's important to develop, think of as if we didn't know what that was and whether we could guess it from the way you were describing it.
Okay.
So whether I distinguish it from other people on campus. So try and characterize your discipline or the kind of characteristics you develop in students. And so forgetting the digital now. So the reason why I thought of doing this is just to really get at what is it that you're trying to develop in students from your disciplinary perspective.
So I'm a bit of an odd fish in that respect, in that I work in life sciences, but I am a physicist. I'm actually, I couldn't go and teach genetics or evolution or anything like that. I just don't know. So I'm only good for one thing really, and that's teaching maths and statistics to students. So the thing that I am really trying to get students to understand, and particularly life science students, is that this strand of mathematics and statistics is going to sort of pervade everything they do during their studies. They're going to become scientists at the end of it, and they're going to need those mathematical tools and knowledge to do research in that field, whether it be zoology or genetics or microbiology. They are going to need maths. So that's my job, and that makes life a bit more easier in terms of technology, because the tools that are available to them and that we're trying to get them to use are they're digital tools. So spreadsheets, calculators. Even now we're developing coding courses for first year students in R and Python. So that's sort of that is where my background comes in. I'm a firm believer that everyone should learn how to code, and that's a real sort of digital capability that I believe every graduate should leave with from a university.
Why? Why would you?
So in terms of preparedness for the future, if you look at technology and how it's been used, not just at a university, but more broadly in society and work and life, it's the idea that you come to university in your first year and what sort of jobs are going to be out there in 3 or 4 years. It's complete nonsense, because we don't know what jobs they're. The whole job market's changing so quickly. You've got data science, which is a huge sort of employer now, and will be sort of exponentially so in the next 5 years. So if we're preparing students sort of in the classical sense now to go and do something which might not even exist in 5 years' time, that's a concern. Whereas I believe that something like coding, in 5 years, there's only going to be a bigger dependence on that skill from an employability sort of point of view. So that's sort of my remit really, is to sort of make sure students are able to know how to code. I believe that's important. Yeah. Okay.
Great. Well, we can come back to some of that, but let's hear from either of you, Kerry or Jon, on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think coding clearly going to be huge, and a really useful skill for graduates of all disciplines who go into all industries pretty much. Similarly, I think in communication and media, we're not about training students for a specific career in a specific communication or media industry or role, but it's about developing a critical awareness and a critical engagement and thinking about communication and media, texts and practices and industries, and thinking about, what does this communicative act or media text say about the world? How has it been constructed? Why has it been constructed? What did the producers kind of intend for that text to say? who has made decisions in whether that has been produced or not? How has it been funded? How has it been organised? You know, how has it been distributed? How does it represent different groups within society? Are there certain perspectives that are privileged? Are there others that are sort of excluded or undermined within that text? You know, how do different groups within society use media to advance their own interests? And who gets to sort of play a part in that? So all the time, you know, this is not about employability necessarily. Lots of employers will be looking for these kinds of critical thinking skills, but this is not about employability. It's about preparing you for life, really, and being able to think about fake news or data privacy and these kinds of issues. You know, these are bubbling up in the public sphere at the moment, but these are things that media and communication scholars have been, you know, talking about for decades. So it's really helpful that these things are in the public sphere and getting more visibility. And it's really important to think about who creates media and for what purpose. If you're interested in that and you want to play a part in it, you need to think carefully about the whole context before you take those steps.
Yeah, I guess from the history perspective, a fairly narrow field of history, we're increasingly thinking about this as a sort of interdisciplinary sphere, if you like, and I think it kind of echoes many things everyone's just been saying, really. So, you know, clearly our very best graduates are excellent communicators, excellent writers, very capable of condensing a large amount of information to a single paragraph or a 10,000 word dissertation. So I always think of that as, you know, as a sort of key indicator of a, you know, an excellent graduate. They understand that we can use knowledge and information in different ways and shape it in different ways and balance our judgment on what that information means. So in that way, I suppose digital comes in, and it's there as a sort of challenge to fit in and to talk about in that kind of context. So yeah, and I suppose just how digital is shaping our present as well. So in terms of fake news and knowledge all around us, I was having a discussion earlier with a colleague who sort of said, well, what do we do? How do we talk about newspapers now, historic newspapers? Because I've never seen a student read a newspaper. Everyone just looks at things on the phone. How are students accessing news and so on? So we almost have to go back to fundamentals and, you know, what's a newspaper? And sort of talk about it in this way. So it's always thinking through our sources and being critically aware of all the information we're looking at, I suppose.
What I thought was interesting is you mentioned, you know, the way that you write for these different, you know, compared to a newspaper for these platforms is very, very different, because you are writing with the specific purpose of ensuring someone reads your content. You know, you're not writing for the Guardian or the Times where you know people's going to buy the paper and sit down on a train or whatever and read it. You're writing for an audience that is constantly flitting between websites and platforms. So, you know, that's, you know, if you're really going to have your words read, you need to sort of tune yourself into that behaviour through your writing. And I think that's a skill which we don't. I mean, maybe is that the sort of thing that you teach within?
Yeah, we have a module which is around writing practices, connected with the kind of public relations industry as well, and how organisations, you know, from across public, private, voluntary sectors will use the written word to engage audiences, and how you really have to compete so much more. You know, it's not a case that, as you just said, where people will buy a newspaper and sit and read it because they're a faithful customer. We've got hundreds and thousands of competing websites all wanting our attention. So there are clearly particular formulas that we would use and particular types of language, but, you know, although we're talking now about digital fluency like it's a new thing, you know, there are actually, you know, these are classic theories like Aristotle's theory of persuasion, where he talks about pathos and logos and ethos, you know, the credibility of the author, hugely important, the logic of your argument, central to, you know, what we teach students throughout their studies at university, and pathos, you know, this is perhaps the part that the mainstream media might inject a little bit more into, but you know, we will all use stories and anecdotes as well to kind of engage and reach audiences, whether they're students in our lecture theatres or, you know, readers of academic journal articles. So although it's digital fluency that we're talking about today, it's really just another layer, like you said at the beginning, I think, that's over our existing world. And, you know, all of these, everything that's gone before is still just as applicable now as it ever has been.
Do you think it is more fundamental, though, if you think about mobile phone use, use and how ubiquitous? I mean, back to where we started in a sense. Do you think there is something more fundamental now that is shaping how people are thinking and acting in the world because of mobile technology?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of evidence to say that echo chambers, you know, are being created. That kind of personalisation of news that we thought would be such a great thing. Hey, I can tailor my news feed. I can get the news that I'm really interested in. But actually, that means that we're all just listening to and reading and watching the kind of perspectives that we already agree with. And this has undoubtedly, you know, been a factor in the rise of Trump and populism and everything else that's going on in the political world at the moment. So we do need to try to find ways to break through that. And there are always kind of new apps, new systems that are trying to break down those barriers. But yeah, it causes problems.
So I'm quite optimistic about this. I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier. It's like, well, we're all like kids in a sweet shop, right? And actually, that's the last 20 years of humanity, right? Since the internet turned up, and we can have anything whenever we want it, and read anything and access anything. You know, we've just got absolutely doolally, to the point where you can't distinguish a credible author from an incredible one, or you can't stop reading something and sort of judge whether it's been manipulated somehow. I think we will eventually learn to do that, and then we'll be the kids in the sweet shop still, but we'll grow up eventually, and we'll still eat lots of sweets, but we'll know which ones are good for us and which ones are bad for us. Yeah, that's sort of what I hope, really. I mean,
in terms of our role then in the university, do you think we have a role in that sweet shop? So what
I think so.
What would you see? I mean, in a way, you've said those things before.
So there's a bit of both, and of course, we're developing this digital fluency attribute as part of our own curriculum now, which I think is great. Actually, I think it's really great we've used the words digital fluency, not digital literacy. We've used that for a long time, and I really like that, because the word fluency sort of acknowledges this idea that technology does change. So my father considers himself digitally literate because he can use a typewriter, right? But he's certainly not literate in the sense of technology now. He wouldn't use a word processor. Whereas fluency sort of acknowledges that if you're a fluent person, you are constantly adapting to these new changes in technology, which are rapid and increasingly rapid, actually. And I think sort of our role here, and it's difficult because the instinct is to jump in and try and control people's behaviour, especially students when they're using technology. You mean, and we have our own virtual learning environment that we want to use, and that's a good thing. It's important we have that, but if you start enforcing technologies on our own students, you might not be allowing them to be as fluent as you want them to be, especially as there are technologies now that students use that I don't know about. I don't use Snapchat or Instagram, and I'm not that old, right? But I know that students are actively using these platforms for study. Beyond on top of our own sort of repositories and vital. So we really are going to ignore that at our detriment. So
can I just check with fluency?
Yes.
What I mean, have you got any strong, well, not necessarily strong, but feelings in terms of about what we call it, or how do you see in terms of the terminology?
I think there's something here about how we read. So how are students reading now? I mean, when I went to university, 1998, I was actually at the University of Liverpool, so I arrived, and I just remember sort of spending time in the library and thinking, I really need to sit down with a book and just read, because that's what you do at university, right? I mean, so I just remember it. I remember very vividly 4 hours, and I sat there and read, and I sort of wonder now, is that still necessary? Is this kind of engagement, deep reading still necessary? I'd argue it is, and I'm sort of wondering how, when we talk about fluency, are we talking about a set of skills? Are we talking about how individuals are engaging with information? Is it about sort of deep learning? Or again, is this about what's skirting around everything now, that we just have to say, well, this is part of life now? So yeah, I guess sort of taking it back to that, how do we read now? How do students read? Again, are we sliding away from something that was quite good into something we need to be? Mentioned moral panic earlier. Is there a sense that we're worrying too much about this? Because I think as well, just two things. Is there a correlation in the quality of writing, for example, that we're seeing students creating now? And I think there are studies. You may correct me or add a bit more detail if you know, but about how people are using online platforms, for instance, flicking from one thing to another and this kind of thing. So that, again, that idea of distraction, how long are people actually spending reading now?
Yeah, I mean, there is evidence to show that young people have increasingly shorter attention spans, that they become impatient more easily, so they're more enthusiastic to find information very quickly, and that doesn't prompt the kind of engagement, the kind of deep level sitting down reading patiently for hours, when that might not give you the immediate quotes that you want for that particular essay at that particular time. So I think there are real concerns, but I think that's for all of us. Like you said at the beginning, you need to put your phone in an envelope to be able to sit down and write for a couple of hours. But that's also part of the way that I think learning as a whole is accelerating. When we think about perhaps when we went to university and the time that it took to find different resources and to, to hunt down. I mean, I think about people doing a PhD in the 70s, I think. How did they do that, without all of these resources at hand, at at their fingertips? So
I still remember scanning, journal articles I'd found in the stacks and things like that.
Microfiche.
I think the acceleration of knowledge, that we're all benefiting from, has got a kind of payoff as well. So, like we said at the beginning, there's upsides and downsides to it all. I mean, there's definitely a move towards more visual social media. You just mentioned Instagram and Snapchat, and there's studies to show from the Pew Centre, for example, that young people are turning in droves to the more visual and away from the more sort of textual platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And there's obviously other wider concerns around Facebook. So I think we do need to think about how we engage with those technologies through teaching, and how students are, drawn to the visual, and how that's going to impact on their kind of future learning, and maybe how we deliver our content.
I think if I was a student now, I'd be so confused, right? Because from experience, I know students turn up at university, and they're still expecting that. They're still expecting that sort of didactic lecture approach. They're expecting someone to stand in front of them and talk. And I think that feeling you described about you feeling that need to go and read, go deep and go read. I think they still have that, and they still expect that. So that's very much there. But at the same time, there is now the expectation that they are going to use technology, and without an explicit sort of set of rules as to what that constitutes. Okay, so we might be talking about technology in terms of, to crystallise what we're talking about in terms of information retrieval would be Control and F, right? Is looking for resources in a different way to how we would have done, by reading a book. But they might be thinking, I've got to use I've got to be using all these platforms, LinkedIn, social media. There's no real distinction sometimes, I don't think. So I think if I was a student now, I'd be really confused as to what is expected of me.
I mean, we can bring that, so that would be interesting to then discuss. Because in a way, I mean, what the literature shows as well, we can move on to talking about, I mean, we have been talking about that anyway, the students' digital capabilities, but the literature shows, they can be adapts and they are adapts on social media, but when it comes to, let's say, history or mathematics or statistics, they wouldn't necessarily know which statistical algorithm to use, or what is it that you're looking for, or you were talking about the critical awareness. So it's I think that's our role, isn't it, to develop that bit, and whether they can bring in any digital know-how that they have in that's an interesting dynamic of whether we then sort of change our teaching to match that. But at the end of the day, that's I just wonder how you see that bit, and we can maybe talk about. Sorry, Jon.
It seemed like almost the sort of old problem of how much content and how much skills-based learning and teaching should be in every module. And maybe I think more of us are now at the moment when we realise, well, we need to spend a good session here on the electronic resources. There needs to be that in-depth work we're doing at the start of a module or midway or whatever. So I think that conversation is going on in history as a discipline. How far is the content going to be there? But I think it's about more and more it's about students creating knowledge, isn't it? So we have to give them those tools, and I think that's a really positive thing about digital is it offers all these tools. But it's then how we combine that with delivering the content and building their awareness of historiography, historical knowledge, and so on. So it's that kind of tension that maybe is there.
In communication and media, the students come with a huge range of skills. Sometimes we assume that young people are net natives, or whatever the phrase is, post-millennials, and that they've grown up with these technologies and they automatically know how to use everything. And, that's often not the case. Some come with editing experience, writing and publishing, blogging, or making videos, or being a radio presenter, producer, but often they don't, and that's fine too. And we're not a kind of production focused course, and there's no compulsion on students to develop those skills, but for some of the students who do, there are a lot of opportunities to develop, to experiment with different technologies. We're experimenting as well. We've got this YouTube channel, but YouTube changes frequently and changes the way they operate the platform, which is hugely challenging to teach with. So, we're always trying to find look at new technologies and see what's going to work. And, I'm certainly very open for students to try new things if they want to try different animation packages, or there's just so much out there that's available, often free or very low cost these days. It's not all about, teaching the latest industry standard package that will probably change a huge amount by the time the students were in a position to be able to deploy those skills in a professional life anyway. So, that might be different for research which is using like SPSS or NVivo or something like that, where they maybe, those skills will be useful sort of immediately beyond graduation. But I think, this is a huge learning curve for all of us.
So you have got, have you got this experience of students having different capabilities? Can you talk a little bit about that, and then see what your strategies are?
So we've recently updated I've just redesigned the module to teach the quantitative skills in the first year, and we've been labouring under an assumption for a while, I think, that basic Excel skills, the students will come to us with those, and that's not true. Students don't know that if you if you press equals sum and then highlight the cells and copy them all down, it'll do that. So that was a bit of a shock to us. So we are now going back and we're ensuring that all students have that. And of course, it's really difficult because half of the students do know how to do that already. So tailoring our resources and content to satisfy a lot. You talk about 400 students here, right? A very, very large group, to make sure that the ones who know it are satisfied and the ones that don't know it are satisfied is very, very difficult. But I think we have to err on the side of not knowing it. It wouldn't. People who already know something, and particularly students, are more happy to be told it if they already know it. Whereas a student who doesn't know it, that isn't told, is distinctly more unhappy, right? So it's better to repeat it in that situation when it comes to sort of digital skills. So you mentioned SPSS as well, that's another. So we've just abandoned SPSS actually for R. So we're replacing all of our statistics with R. And again, that's from an employability perspective, using an open source platform, which is probably going to be more, likely that you use that once you graduate then. It makes you more amenable for other jobs. Yeah.
Okay, and what about history? What's your, Jon, in terms of students' capabilities when you get them in year one?
Yeah, really mixed. I mean, this year we have a group project in year one, and one of the students knew how to create websites. So that person created the website for the group, and it's really professional, great. And I think we could probably do more to capture those different skills and then develop them, because obviously throughout our curriculum we're developing particular history-centered skills, but we could certainly do more to capture those different skill sets as students arrive here.
Is this something people do, or you kind of come across how students are, or does anyone ask students what their digital skills are when they join, or you have a rough understanding from where?
I don't think we do actually.
Yeah.
We just, we would always say that, especially for sort of entry requirements for maths anyway, we say, well, you don't need A-level maths, and we sort of acknowledge that half the students are going to have it and half of them aren't, but we certainly don't ask beyond that. We don't say, can you use a database? Can you use this package? I think we assume very little. And we say, oh well, we're gonna assume that they know nothing, but actually there is sometimes an expectation there, even if it comes down to how to use a certain function on a word processor, or how to use some referencing software. There's a slight assumption there that they know how to do it, and that's not always true, which causes a lot of heartache, especially if there's no resources in place for that.
So I think in communication and media, also we have this huge range of students, a huge range of skills that they come to us with, some very much more advanced in some ways than others, and others vice versa. And that it's our job as they sort of join the university to help them understand the arena of sort of digital tools available to them, whether that is looking for academic literature, looking for credible sources, learning how to tell which are the more credible sources than others, and how to sort of get those resources to work together, as well as how to produce their own kind of media texts and critically engage with what is out there in terms of media and digital text. So thinking about digital text, social media, fake news, websites, games, how are these texts constructed and what was their purpose, and how should I treat them, how should I engage with them, as well as the more kind of traditional media like film and TV and journalism.
Great, okay.
Yeah, I think digital awareness in relation to history, if we think about what we want a third year graduate to, what kind of attributes you want a third year graduate to have. I mean, I suppose there's kind of three things when I'm thinking about this. It's the initial starting point now with the advent of digital is amazingly, it's so much more rich, and the possibilities are much, much wider. There are a great deal of benefits in terms of starting a research project, framing research questions. And then the second thing is, I suppose, when the research is conducted, it's helping students think about how they might store information, create their own data sets, what sort of tools they might use there. Also, are there ways to link that digital awareness, that awareness of what now is online, to analog forms of research? So that blending, I think, is actually really interesting, and I think, you know, takes research into really interesting new directions. And I suppose thirdly, it's thinking about what, you know, are there ways through assessment we can encourage different forms of expression? So podcasts, videos, posters, websites. So I suppose it's, you know, so students learning to communicate in different ways because of all these new possibilities that are out there. So yeah, I guess we are pushing students in different directions, or encouraging students to think in different directions and work in different directions, because of, you know, what's been going on for the last decade and more, I suppose.
And I think that is a really important part of our work through assessment, is what we encourage students to do, and how they communicate their work. So whatever the subject of the topic of discussion or debate, or the piece of analysis that they need to do, or the literature review, how they communicate their ideas, I think is very much part of digital fluency, and learning to communicate, you know, through a blog, through written word, but perhaps a different style, or an interactive kind of website, or a video, or a game even. You know, there are different ways to communicate particular messages. So I think when we're talking, you know, communication skills has been a part of those transferable skills that we want to teach students for a long, long time. And I think digital skills is just another layer to that, which is probably needed for a finite period of time, you know, as we all go through this kind of transition. And then it becomes much more a kind of natural part of the work that we do, and the way that we all communicate.
I mean, now that, thanks for bringing up assessment, because that was one of be my question in terms of how do we know, or how does the student know that they have acquired digital skills or digital capabilities? And it's perhaps talking about your examples in your, because you're here because you've all done something around this, in terms of you can relate it to your examples, or your practice of how that might happen in whatever that activity or assessment task is with them. So how does it work for you? What sort of things might you be assessing? I suppose that's the question.
So I've taught a second year module around media writing, and as part of that, students were asked to produce a reflective video essay, in which they reflect on the way that they applied the theory in their practice. They reflected on legislation and kind of regulatory issues that they had to take into consideration when developing a portfolio. And how they worked with sources, how they went out and found people to interview, and how they, you know, approached that, how they structured it, how it went, and kind of overall summing up what they've learned. So pretty much the content is like a normal reflective essay, but they communicated this through the form of video. This was something that I was very flexible in terms of how they were able to produce the video. I didn't really put in any kind of requirements for technical excellence, or, you know, using any kind of particular software. I had a resource available if they wanted it, and we've got software in the university available if they wanted it. And they were able to borrow cameras if they wanted them, but many of them just used mobile phones or other cameras that they had available, webcams on their laptops. Many students have iMovie and things like that, which you can produce a really great video with, you know, really well cut, engaging, nice graphics. It was a relatively small part of the overall module mark, so it wasn't a huge pressure for them. Some of them found the video production parts more challenging than others, and I did provide extra support to some of those. So, you know, that does raise issues when you've got huge modules with hundreds of students on them. But for manageable numbers, you know, that was something that worked pretty well. And I think it's a really good way of getting to know your students as well. You know, for us, when we can see them visually, it helps sometimes when you've got large student numbers, large numbers of essays.
Mm-hmm. So there's your added benefit of multimodal assessment. How do you think this might work, or what would we say to academics X who just says, oh, I can't do editing, I can't possibly ask students to edit because I can't do it. What's your thoughts on this?
This is a big problem for us, is that technology changes faster than we can teach it, right? So, if you're going to teach something like, make a podcast, or you want to make a website, there are very, very few members of staff who actually have those skills themselves. So, to find staff to teach that and support that is very, very difficult. And I worry that in the future we'll end up in the situation where, that demand to teach a particular digital skill or capability will be completely sort of overwhelming our ability to deliver on that. So that's a really big worry, and it's far more difficult for us as staff to retrain to do that than for the students to learn it themselves. That's a much bigger job actually, is to.
And is that a barrier, do you think? Because in some ways I'm thinking in that case, for instance, I'm sure, Kerry, it would be interesting to see what exactly, and it might be different for media students because that's their specialism, but let's say if they weren't communication and media students, let's say if they were history students, the main thing you're trying to get is that the students are able to communicate their findings about history, not necessarily that they did a Adobe Premiere, perfectly fine cut BBC level broadcast, but it's how they use some of the media. So in that sense, would you say that it would be necessary for the staff member to have all the multimedia editing skills in that case?
So no, I think the only thing it really requires is a bit more flexibility actually. I mean, you go and look at a traditional life science program and you look at the assessments that the students submit. I mean, conventionally, there are three things they're going to submit. They're going to submit an essay or a report written in Word or some other word processor. They're going to submit a poster, probably done in PowerPoint or some other graphics editing software, or they're going to do a presentation using PowerPoint, most likely. And really, they do those three assessments. Or three kinds of assessments, and they do it over and over again because, not because we're afraid to push them to do other things, but that's all we can do very often, as a group of staff or academics, that very often is sort of the limiting factor, I think. And, I know I'm doing a huge number of colleagues a huge disservice by saying that, but I think it would be better sometimes to say, look, here's the content. Here's the content I want you to generate. I want you to really go away and think hard about this. I don't care how you deliver it to me. You can use your own skills and use and be creative. Allow them to be creative to do that, so that when you assess that, you assess it primarily on the content, and you're a lot more flexible with the design. I mean, I've used rubrics, where you've got an assessment where they have to design something as well, and they have very, very strict criteria for the design, and the students get very upset, like, oh, well, I didn't come here to learn how to design something, I came here for the content. And that's the communication part, which, yes, I agree, we should really be assessing them on, but I would love them to be creating videos and
so
blogs.
What would tip people on that point? Because let's say I'm a member of staff and I get a research grant that I really want to apply for that only accepts video proposals.
Right. Yeah.
You would probably go out and the reason I'm asking it, because when we talk to students, one of the things they have, staff needs more training. But I'm guessing that training people, to come to a workshop is you come and do it. It's not, but there is other issues where people are very busy and it's not. So in that case, they would probably do it because they have to succeed in that grant application. But I think, that's probably a different point from the question that's, do we always need to be the expert in everything in order to...
No,
I don't subject expertise not
but
enough?
I think very often the expectation is that, yes, we do, but I think if we were all to acknowledge that that's not necessary, then I think we would really see a much greater diversity in the kinds of tools that students are using to submit their assessments. I don't believe personally it would detract from the content. Students still got to submit a project report, which is going to be a significant fraction of their degree. But wouldn't it be lovely if they could augment it with a podcast, which they could actually publish. People could go and listen to their research, or a blog article, or they could have a profile for their thesis or their project online. They could build a website for it and say, here you go, I've written this, you can go and download and read it. I think those skills are going to be more and more useful to them than actually having written the project themselves. I agree it's important they learn how to write and do research, but in terms of employability, that's assumed, right? Employers assume that if you've done a degree, you can do that. They're after the added value stuff. So if you're going into an interview situation, they assume you've written a project and you can go and retrieve information and understand it and curate it. But if you say, oh yeah, and I built a website to tell people about it, or I delivered a podcast to do it, for an employer, that would be lighting up bulbs, right?
But I think it's sorry.
No.
I think it's important to look at these things at a program level, isn't it? What we don't want is every module leader suddenly redesigning their module to include a blog or a portfolio or whatever it is, because we still need essays and we need exams and we need presentations and we need these kind of core skills. But also, we would like students to have the opportunity to develop other kinds of digital or creative skills as well. I mean, I think our university, strategy talks about culturally rich graduates, and we want students to be able to express themselves in different ways and be creative at times through their degree. And so the task really for developing these assignments does not always need to fall at the feet of the module leader, and developing the confidence to be able to say, okay, you're going to do a video essay, or you're going to go off and bring this back in any kind of format you like, as long as it fulfills the learning outcomes. There's a great example from English, actually. Matthew Bradley has developed this really interesting module assessment where the students critique do a literary critique of a particular novel, but they can present it in any form they like. Doesn't have to be digital, so they've had people with sculptures, they've had a student design a board game and kind of big pieces of art through which they will come in and present the way that this object that they've created represents their critique. So there are all sorts of creative things that can be done in all kinds of subjects. But as I said, it's not always the module convener's responsibility to do that. And we have specialists in the university, within the sort of centre of the university and the academy and CIE. And then we have other people based out in faculties. If they are equipped and kind of given the times and the resources to be able to contribute and work together with academics, I think that can be a much more fruitful way of embedding these kinds of tasks and skills across the curriculum, because it is time consuming going out, even thinking, right, I'm going to do a blog assignment here, so I've got to go out and look at different kinds of blog tools. I've got to explore the blog tool or the journal tool in Vital. That's a challenge in itself. I've got to decide which is the best one. I need to know how to use it myself, because I'm going to tell students to use it, and that's not fair, is it? I can't tell them to use something I don't know how to use. So everyone reinventing the wheel all the time is not, a good use probably of our time. So perhaps there is, a role in the future for more collaboration between different parts of the university in designing these kinds of assessments.
And I'm glad, Kerry, you said about the program level design, because I think it is very important to think about it holistically and what the students' progression as well as they come in year one and how they progress in terms of in any of the skills, as you said, in whatever it's the subject knowledge or any additional skills that. And I think creativity, it's nice that you mentioned, because again, that's one of the usually in the top 10 lists of employers that they're currently looking, I mean, in terms of 21st century. And I think that's a lovely example. It kind of comes back to your envelope example, how we started, that what you said about, it's students deciding whether the digital will be right in that moment to use for that task or not, and having that play and understanding and critique whether it's the right tool or not in that situation for them.
And that is what they're going to have to do in the real world. They're going to go out and get jobs and have employers that give them things to do, and they're going to have to make decisions about what is the best way to communicate the results of my work. So
Jon, is there anything you want
Actually, everything I was going to say.
I know it's kind of that. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Shut up.
No, that was about it, to be honest. Yeah, I suppose just generally, a big complex institution like ours, it's a sense that, like you said, there is a lot going on. There's a lot of expertise everywhere, and sometimes there's a sense to, move towards integrating and sharing, I suppose, all of that expertise. And maybe it's about encouraging students to do some extracurricular more extracurricular activities, such as the know-how workshops in the library, for example. So maybe it's about that side of things, as the support structures for both students and academics, and just sort of building that.
And I think just as a final thought, I know we have to wrap up, but innovation happens usually at the intersection of disciplines. I'm quite interested in that interdisciplinary angle of how that might happen, and in the digital area as well, that is the case, that sometimes those connections can spring up ideas. But if someone was starting to think about doing something around this area, so basically embedding digital fluency, what would be your top tip to them?
Do it. Don't be afraid to fail, because I think that's, there's a very good chance if you try something new, and there is that fear that you are only one step ahead of students if you're creating an assessment or assignment. Try it. Find something that's a nice little case study or example. Don't do it with 400 students, perhaps, but try it. It might be an abject failure, but at least you'll know how to do it right the next time.
Yeah, I think it's researching, aspects of good practice and doing that extra bit of work. And I think, from an academic's point of view, it's creating that space, and sometimes it means universities giving us an extra bit of space to be able to do that kind of work as well. So part of this discussion, I think, is about resource, and it's about the realities of our working lives. And like you mentioned earlier, if we're having all these new things coming our way, it can seem a bit overwhelming at times. So I think there is a question there about expectations and resource as well.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. I think doing these kinds of things takes time and a lot of headspace, and when people are under pressure for various reasons, then that's not easy to create those spaces. In terms of top tips, I would say speak to other people who've done it. Go and speak to yourselves in CIE, come and speak to other members of staff who have done it. I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone who wanted to do that kind of thing about my experiences. And that's how I learnt to do things like this, by working with other people with better skills than me in some areas. And
check out Media Pool.
Yeah.
on YouTube. You can also plug your areas if you want.
Oh, I could do about 10 different plugs, and it would be shameful. I could talk about HiPi for an hour if you let me, but I won't do that today.
Okay, I'm sure we will see. But that was great. Thank you so much for coming. It was really good discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. I hope you join us in our future podcasts.